if you don't have a coach right now, I guess you will lose every game almost.
I didn't really understand the value up until the point I got Daylor by my side.
The newer players who are playing more and just want it more and are more skilled now, they just come in and the coach tells them what they're doing wrong and what they're doing right, and they're just improving and getting better.
He was player before, he knows what to do, he knows what to search for.
Yeah, if there's no coaches, then I don't think there will be any improvement at all.
Coaching makes team improve faster, and it creates some sort of atmosphere where it's very team related always.
It's like almost impossible to be a good team if you have no coach.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our coverage of the European League Championship Series. We're beaming to the four corners of the globe from our studio in Berlin. As you can see, Hybrid and Trick there, and the rest of G2 walking to the studio, as well as Elements setting up because they will be playing in the first game of the day up against G2. Tough match for them. And there are loyal fans in the studio, as always, getting ready here for Coaches Week in the European LCS. As we approach the playoffs. Hello, I'm EpicSkillshot supporter right here at the analyst desk, joined by James Struss O'Leary and Mitch Kreppel-Voorspolza. Well, gentlemen, it is Coaches Week, as I mentioned before. I personally am very excited to be talking to these people behind our top teams.
I'm hoping we get a lot more behind the scenes influence on what coaches do. With what are their responsibilities? How do they differ from team to team? Excited to take a look at that.
Yeah, definitely. And with just 6 games left on each team's slate before playoffs, we have a 3-way tie for the top of the standings. Vitality have joined H2K and G2 in the #1 spot, and UOL is just a game behind them, followed by Fnatic and Origin. To me personally, I like this situation because we come from an era of having Fnatic at the #1 the whole time, or SK Gaming in 2015. Now we have 3 top teams at that #1 spot.
Yeah, Europe as a region, even after the Exodus, having 3 top teams here, with both Origin and Fnatic not being in there, is actually really fun for me to watch as like an analyst. As well as the fact that both H2K and Vitality seem to play this very calculated style where they take it slow and steady, but G2, they did throw it all out the window, they just go ham. So it's a really cool, different set of styles that can both still succeed in this meta. Obviously, we need to see how far G2 get because they're slowly being figured out, but at least it was fun to see.
Yeah, and on top of that, we do see a bigger divide between the top of the tables and the bottom of the tables, and then Fnatic and Origin, who are kind of trying to get into the top half, but to not much success lately.
Yeah, they're stuck in the mix right at the bottom of the top section, if you look at those top 6 teams. And honestly, for these 2 teams, Origin, Fnatic, their goal, they have to already assume they're going to make playoffs just at the level they're at, but I think their goal now has to be on improving so that you can make semi-finals. Right now, Fnatic and Origin, if they make a semi-finals game, I feel it's underperforming for where they're at today's performance for these 2 teams. Yeah, overperforming. my apologies, overperforming.
Yeah, you can obviously never count them out in playoffs, but they still need to get there and have a good foundation. So for Fnatic, I definitely agree. On Origin, I almost feel like the wins will be a given. Yes, Fnatic did lose to Splice, but overall, I feel these teams are so likely to beat the teams below them, have even games, but lose to the teams above them. So they can expect ending 5th and 6th, but they need to start isolating issues and work on them every week. For Fnatic, one glaring issue is obviously their approach to the mid-game in terms of like vision and setup around objectives. We'll get more into that hopefully later too. And then Origin, yeah, they have a lot more issues. They're slowly fixing the whole SOAS isn't getting resources because they're finally playing around them. SOAS just straight up carried them through the mid-game last week, so they're working on things, hopefully improving up by playoffs because somehow they always manage to switch it around for playoffs, both Fnatic and Origin.
Yeah, coming into playoffs form. Of course, they're all both heading to Katowice next week, Fnatic and Origin. We will see if that'll help them because they'll get the scrim, maybe the scrim if the scrims don't go well, teams from other regions. So we'll see how that influences their preparation. On top of that, we got a hit on patch 6.3. Last week was the first week we saw it. There was a lot of discussion. Will we not see the Kog'Maw at all? We will see it every game. In the end, it was 90% Pig ban, 3 wins and 2 losses, and we haven't adequately seen teams fighting against it, in my opinion.
I mean, we've seen some compositions. I believe it was a Splice game where it was really good anti-Kog'Maw composition. The problem was they weren't playing it well. So with the introduction of a new hyper carry that is very static in its nature, where teams kind of play around it, both the teams playing against it and the teams using it will need to learn how to use it. And I think now, maybe next week, or after Katowice is when we'll truly see how teams really play well with Kog'Maw and how teams look to counter it, because then the teams will have much more scrim experience, exposure, different teams, because it'll be picked in different regions too, and you can actually watch and see what people do with and against that Kog'Maw. But definitely, it's really good to have another strong AD carry there in the bot lane that kind of doesn't have a gap closer.
For sure. I mean, we even saw the evolution in Challenger, which obviously takes place on the 6.3 patch, where there was a rift between teams with the likes of a strong team like Millennium were very good at shutting down a weaker team. So I wouldn't be surprised in a series like G2 Elements to see G2 leave it open and then say we have a strategy to shut this down. And the strategy comes somewhat from the jungle as well, the ability to dive. And Gragas, we saw a lot of B-roll there from Gragas and his impact on the game. He's back out of the jungle, still a viable pick. I'm expecting a lot more this week again.
Well, we'll see what we see of 6.3 on the stage here as we embark on week 7 with G2 Esports versus Elements.
Then after that, it is Giants versus Vitality, and followed by that, it's going to be our match of the week between H2K and the reigning European champions, Fnatic.
Yeah, H2K and Fnatic, of course. Fnatic, the underdog in this matchup versus H2K. We'll see what happens in that one. And all week long, we'll be joined by the coaches of the European LCS for our Spring Coaches Week. With all that insider insight on the desk, we're giving you the chance to ask your guests, our guests, and yours, your questions with the hashtag #AskACoach. As always, be sure to tweet at LOL Esports along with that hashtag so we can talk them over later today. And now to kick off Coaches Week, we're going to take a look at the numbers with Trevor Quickshot Henry.
Thank you very much, Shucks. And when we look at those numbers and we talk about wins and losses, especially with teams or players, we often talk about how they showed up on the LCS stage, how they showed up at international events, but rarely do we actually break down the records of the minds behind each team. So because it's Coaches Week here in Europe, we thought it might be time to take a look at those records. Let's talk about how we measured performances. So first and foremost, we started tracking coaches from spring of 2015. That's when it became mandatory for every organization in the LCS to have a coach with them on stage and hopefully helping out. The numbers that we're about to break down represent a European LCS career total. So that is both regular season, postseason, and that means playoffs. And we only considered coaches who have 10 or more games under their belt. So you have to be proven and stick around for a while. Let's start with the most decorated European coach. It is Daylor from Fnatic. A career record of 50 wins and 16 losses. A perfect summer split. 2 League Championship Series titles and a World semi-final run under his belt within his first year as a coach. This was, of course, with the former Fnatic roster. It is a phenomenal debut into the coaching scene. But in 2016, his mettle as a coach and his players is truly being tested. And it's being tested by a multitude of other coaches. I'd like to take a look at who else is in the top 5 coaches list for wins and losses. You've already met Daylor. We've already talked about that great record. We need to see if he stays that way, because hot on his heels is Youngbuck from Gamers2. A newly minted coach, a 9-3 winning record, and behind the hungry players of G2, Youngbuck is showing that at least for now, he's showing up. We'll see how long he can keep it up. SK's Inner Flame, formerly a coach in 2015 on the LCS stage, had a great win-loss record, thanks in large part to the regular season wins that SK was able to accrue. And now we're getting to 2 veterans coaches. Prolly from H2K is currently sitting in 4th place, 47 wins, 24 losses. The best thing about Prolly is he has demonstrated the ability to teach macro play to 2 different rosters, back-to-back splits. In a similar vein is our 5th winningest coach, Sean's from Vitality. He helped Gambit develop some map play that we had not seen from him in a while, and he's currently leading the way for Vitality, who currently might just be the strongest team in Europe. In order to appreciate the top 5 coaches at the top of the table, we have to contrast them with the lowest win rate coaches who are at the bottom of the table. There are Nif and Lozart currently still on the stage with the players, and these are guys who are still trying to figure out a way to impact their players positively. And talking about players, I was personally interested when looking at these results in the players turned coaches. And were they more successful or less successful than, say, Daylor, who has no previous competitive record? So we took a look at players who had competed on stage and contrasted their LCS record with their coaching record. And you can see players like Prolly and Youngbuck, who may have struggled with their relative team's complexity, and then Copenhagen Wolves have got very good win records. Yamato Cannon has got a very young, very new team, and he wasn't able to find success with Roccat last year. He's trying to do it with Splice this year. And finally, the most veteran player turned coach in Nif, with a lot of games under his belt. He's still currently struggling with Elements. So make what you will of coaches, players turned coaches and how successful they can be. For now, we're about to head into the first match of the day, so let's head back to the analyst desk to set it up for us.
Well, thank you, Trevor. All those numbers. One thing we do need to point out is that they all pale in comparison to Koma over in Korea. Because if you look at SKT, when they were both at KNS, he had like a 73% or 70%, I believe I saw Monty tweeted out once, win rate over like 100 games. Right now, after the merger, they're sitting at like 75, 78% over like a total of 100 games. That is absolutely insane, and I really wish I spoke Korean so I could learn a little bit from him. Sadly, whenever I see him, it comes down to translating through various sources, so hopefully one day we can unlock the mind that is Koma.
Well, the Korean scene had a big head start on that. They've had a lot of this infrastructure around it for so very long in esports, so maybe there's hope later down the line, but still, he's putting up big numbers.
Hey, maybe some of these coaches can step into his shoes. Youngbuck doing really well with G2, and he's up against Elements and NIF in this first game of the day. When we look at last week's performance for these two teams, they didn't play on their strengths of the early game. They had some good early games, but they just failed to capitalize. Of course, we got to remember that G2 game versus Fnatic where they were 5,000 gold ahead, but some of the same things go for Elements.
Yeah, and it's something we've seen almost the entire split for Elements, regardless of whether they lose early or win early, they will struggle in the mid game. Their vision setup, it takes too much time. G2, they're kind of used to snowballing, so now when the games sometimes slow down in the middle of the game, they're also struggling with that phase around Baron, you know, what do we do, how do we get it? They repetitively tried to keep baiting it, but Fnatic were on the top of their game and they stalled out the match, but that is a match that G2 should have never lost.
Exactly, and you also handed it to them on Twitter, I saw this week. Looking at the matchup in the mid lane, which could be very decisive in this one if we look at both players' playstyles. It is Ica versus Perks. That's not Ica versus Perks, but it's that one.
Like
That's them. It'll be very important because we know how dominant Perks can be in this lane, and he can really take over a game.
Yeah, for me, the funniest thing about this is the way that these two have grown since Challenger. This was a matchup that we looked at in European Challenger last year, and we're like, okay, well, we expect Perks to take the lead from it, but maybe Ica can do something. The problem is the result, I feel now, is still the same, but Perks has grown so much as a player, not just being able to dominate a laning phase, but being able to carry a game from that as well. And honestly, G2 have got such a good basis around that middle lane that they can even carry from other lanes alongside that. So Ica, with his wave clear style recently with the Morgana, may struggle, well, should struggle in this matchup. When
he will definitely struggle. I mean, I was watching Challenger a little bit as well when I watched Perks, and I honestly thought coming to the LCS, Perks, overrated. He's going to be okay. I got completely shut up. He performs superb. We see there the 7 CS up on average, but what it doesn't take into context is that he makes it so that whoever's playing against Perks gets really low CS numbers. He really puts the pressure in that matchup, and that's something you can't quantify in stats. And then obviously we showed some KDA. Usually I don't like KDA, but Perks is tripling whatever Aka's doing. So in addition to likely out-farming him, killing it a couple of times, Perks will spread to different parts of the map, whether it's with Corki using the packets or just roaming, aggressively grouping up with his jungler. He's putting so much pressure, whereas Aka is often playing wave clear matchups and is kind of stuck, even pushed in sometimes. So it's very stark contrast and probably the matchup to watch for this match.
And very dangerous for Elements as Perks could just get geared up and run away with this game. And as we go, Mr. Rawls tells us how coaches have changed the team environment in more ways than one.
Back in the days when you didn't have a coach, at least from my experience, there was a lot of trash talk and everyone was really toxic because there was not really anyone who was looking at you and people just kind of doing their own thing. And now that you have a coach, you have someone that you respect and you respect his opinion, and it makes everyone try a lot harder in the game and outside of the game. Like, there was a lot of ups and downs when we didn't have coaches because scrimming was not very fun. We think we play better when Nif is cooking food for us, especially lasagna, so him cooking lasagna makes us better.
All right, Nif makes lasagna, Steve bakes cookies, they got all their nutrition. Hey everybody, I'm Devin Pyrotechnics Young here.